Chapter 1. The Mission Briefing. Orders that made no sense. The room smelled of burnt coffee, oil, and the stale air of men who had been waiting too long for answers. 12 soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder on metal folding chairs in a briefing room inside Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, throwing a pale glare across the maps and folders laid out on the table. Briefings usually carried a rhythm, almost like a checklist: intelligence summary, terrain overview, expected enemy strength, rules of engagement, exfil plan. Most missions followed the same structure, the same cadence, but this one didn't sound like anything they had been trained for. Captain Harris, their commanding officer, stepped to the front with a stack of papers that looked like they had been photocopied 100 times. No glossy satellite imagery, no drone footage, just old, grainy maps marked with coordinates drawn in red ink. Some of the markings didn't even make sense. They crossed through blank spaces where official maps showed nothing but desert and mountains. The captain's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. "You're headed to a sector in the eastern mountains. It's off-grid, not on your standard maps." He tapped a finger on a red circle scribbled over a narrow valley. "Our task is reconnaissance only. No engagement unless absolutely necessary." That was the first red flag. In Afghanistan, valleys like that were often choke points for ambushes. Reconnaissance missions almost always included drones, air support, and QRF, quick reaction force, backup. But Harris was clear. No air assets, no drones, no satellite comms once inside the valley. Radios would be restricted to short range only. "Sir," one of the sergeants spoke up, "if this place isn't even on our sat maps, why are we going there?" Harris adjusted his glasses and gave the kind of answer no soldier liked to hear. "That's above my pay grade. We follow orders." Then came the second red flag. The captain drew their attention to several cave openings marked on the map. His expression hardened. "Under no circumstances do you enter these caves. They are off limits. Your mission ends the second you approach them. Copy that?" The room went quiet. Every soldier knew caves were natural strongholds. If enemy fighters were hiding, caves were where they'd be. To forbid entry outright made no tactical sense. It felt less like strategy and more like superstition. Private Morales leaned toward his buddy and whispered, "So what? We just walk past them? Like they don't exist?" The briefing dragged on, filled with vague warnings and an odd emphasis on discipline and containment. There was no mention of enemy troop strength, no expected resistance, no civilian presence, nothing that explained why 12 men were being sent into uncharted territory with their hands tied. When the floor was opened for final questions, the squad leader asked the one everyone was thinking, "Sir, what exactly are we looking for out there?" Captain Harris hesitated. He shifted his weight, then finally said, "Unusual activity. Just document and return. That's it. Unusual activity." The words echoed strangely in the silence that followed. It wasn't military language. It sounded like something a scientist or a spook would say. The men were dismissed, but no one moved right away. They sat there, staring at the maps, at the red circles that seemed more like warnings than objectives. On the way out, Morales muttered under his breath, "Orders that made no damn sense." And though no one said it out loud, each of them had caught the same look in Captain Harris's eyes, a look that said he knew more than he could tell them. Something about this mission wasn't just unusual, it was wrong. Chapter 2. Into the Mountains, a road no map could explain. The convoy rolled out at dawn, 3 Humvees crawling through the dust like slow-moving beasts. The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of fire and shadow, the jagged ridgelines cutting into the sky like broken teeth. The men were silent, each caught in his own thoughts about the strange briefing from the night before. Private Morales rode in the back seat, helmet tilted forward, trying to shake the feeling that they weren't just heading into hostile terrain. They were being sent into something no one wanted to name. He stared at the map on his lap, tracing the red circles and half-faded lines. It was useless. The route they were taking wasn't even marked. Normally, military maps were meticulous. Every goat path, every dried-up riverbed, every culvert was catalogued. But as the Humvees climbed deeper into the mountains, the road they followed simply stopped existing on paper. According to the digital GPS, they were driving straight into a blank screen. "GPS is dead again?" their driver, Specialist Turner, muttered, tapping the monitor. "Keeps losing signal. We're off the grid." "Maybe that's the point," Sergeant Walker said, his eyes scanning the ridges through the dusty windshield. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. The road itself was strange, narrow yet unnaturally smooth, as if it had been cut into the rock long before asphalt and heavy machinery ever touched Afghanistan. The Humvee's tires hummed against the surface, and more than one soldier noticed the faint patterns carved into the stone, like symbols worn down by centuries of erosion. "Who the hell built this?" Morales whispered, half to himself. No one answered. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the quieter the world seemed to become. Normally, Afghan valleys were alive with sound, distant gunfire, barking dogs, the calls of shepherds. Here, there, was nothing. No villages, no livestock, not even birds in the sky. Just the endless stone and the occasional gust of wind that howled through the cliffs like a warning. By midday, the men had stopped talking altogether. The strangeness of the road pressed down on them like a weight. Even Turner, usually quick, with jokes, kept his eyes locked on the wheel. Finally, the lead Humvee ground to a halt. Captain Harris stepped out, map in hand, his boots crunching against gravel. The others dismounted, stretching stiff legs and scanning the ridgelines with wary eyes. "According to this," Harris said, pointing at the map, "we should be staring at solid rock. No road, no valley. But here we are." They stood in silence, staring at the path unfurling before them. The cliffs seemed to close in tighter, the light dimming even though the sun still sat high overhead. Walker knelt, brushing his gloved hand over the ground. The road wasn't dirt. It wasn't gravel. It was stone, smooth, deliberate, and far too precise to be natural. His stomach twisted. "This wasn't built by the locals." Harris didn't respond. He only folded the map, shoved it into his pocket, and gave the order to move on. As the convoy pushed forward, Morales caught sight of something etched into the rock wall. A symbol, faint but unmistakable, like a circle cut through with jagged lines. He wanted to point it out, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the fear of sounding paranoid. Maybe it was the way the mark looked less like graffiti and more like a warning. The road narrowed further, forcing them into single-file formation. The cliffs loomed so close they could almost reach out and touch them. The radios crackled with static, voices fading in and out until they became nothing but white noise. And then, as the sun began to dip, the road opened suddenly into a wide basin surrounded by towering walls of rock. They weren't on any map. They weren't supposed to exist here. And for the first time since the briefing, the men realized they weren't just following orders anymore. They were following a path someone, or something, had laid out for them long before they arrived. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Wind, Soldiers. Hear what shouldn't be heard night. In the Afghan mountains had a weight all its own. The kind of silence that pressed against your ears until you thought you could hear your own blood moving. But in the basin where the squad had set up a temporary perimeter, the silence wasn't complete. It carried something else. The men had settled into routine, weapons checked, night vision gear adjusted, radio antennas raised to catch any scrap of signal. A small fire had been forbidden, too risky, too visible, so they sat in the dark, eating cold rations and trading low whispers. It started with Morales. He froze mid-bite, tilting his head toward the cliff walls. You hear that? Walker looked up from cleaning his rifle. Hear what? Morales swallowed hard. Voices. The others chuckled, thinking it was nerves. But then Turner stiffened. No, he's right. Sounds like... He paused, eyes narrowing beneath his helmet. Sounds like people talking, but not close. The squad fell quiet, straining to listen. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly carried on the wind that funneled through the narrow pass, came the murmur of voices. Too soft to understand, but undeniably human. The problem was, there were no villages here. No patrols, no known enemy positions. According to the maps, this valley shouldn't even exist. Could be Taliban, Harris said firmly, breaking the spell. Keep your guard up. His voice was steady, but his eyes shifted toward the darkness with unease. They doubled the watch. 2 men at all times, scanning the cliffs with NVGs, fingers resting on their triggers. Yet the voices never drew closer, never retreated. They hung in the air like a recording caught in an endless loop. By 0200 hours, Walker, the squad leader, was pacing the perimeter when he caught a phrase, just one word, clear as day, carried through the gusts, his name. He spun, weapon raised, scanning the shadows. Nothing. His heart hammered against his chest plate. He told no one. At 0330, Morales broke. He shook Turner awake, his face pale in the glow of the night vision lens. They're calling me, man. I swear to God they're calling my name. Turner, wide-eyed, shook his head. Don't say that. Don't give it power. By dawn, none of them had slept. The voices faded with the rising sun, leaving only the endless stone and the suspicion that fatigue had gotten the better of them. But no one wanted to admit out loud what they all felt. The voices hadn't sounded foreign. They hadn't sounded like Pashto or Dari or even Arabic. They had sounded like English. Chapter 4. The Abandoned Village, Signs of Life Without People. The road wound down from the basin and cut through a narrow gorge before opening into a valley that, by all rights, shouldn't have been there. What lay ahead stopped the convoy in its tracks. An entire village. Mud brick houses clustered against the hillside, their walls cracked but standing. A dry well sat at the center, ringed by stones worn smooth by years of use. Wooden carts leaned against walls. Cooking pots lay scattered outside doorways. But no people. Command said nothing about a settlement here, Walker muttered, lifting his binoculars. No structures. Nothing. Maybe it's abandoned, Turner offered, though his voice lacked conviction. Soviet era, maybe. Captain Harris ordered a sweep. Weapons up, the men moved cautiously into the village, boots crunching against dirt that hadn't seen footprints in years, or so it should have looked. Instead, what they found sent cold sweat crawling down their backs. Fresh tracks. Not just one set, many. Bare feet, small and large, crisscrossing through the dust as though dozens of people had walked the streets only hours before. Morales bent, down, touching the dirt. The tracks were sharp, edges crisp, not weathered. They were here, he whispered. Like yesterday. Inside the homes it was the same. Half-eaten bread hardened on wooden tables. Clay cups sat overturned as, though knocked aside in a hurry. In one room, a child's doll lay face down on the floor, its fabric stiff with dirt. But there were no bodies, no signs of violence, just a village left behind in the middle of life. The squad spread out, radios crackling with static as they checked building after building. Harris kept his face calm, but his knuckles whitened around his rifle. Every room was the same story. Life interrupted, never resumed. Sir, Walker called from the far edge of the village. You need to see this. The men gathered where the houses gave way to the cliffs. A goat pen stood there, its wooden fence intact, its troughs filled with dried grass. Inside were bones, dozens of them, piled in a heap. Not clean like the work of scavengers, but brittle, sun-bleached, untouched for years. And yet the tracks leading into the pen were fresh. The wind howled suddenly through the valley, carrying, with it, the faint creak of a door swinging open somewhere behind them. The squad turned as one, weapons raised. A single shutter banged against its frame, though no breeze touched the other houses. "Clear the rooftops," Harris ordered, his voice tight. "We're not alone here." But the rooftops were empty. The alleys were empty. The village was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched grew heavier with every passing second. Morales swore he saw movement in one of the doorways, but when he stormed inside, the house was barren. By the time they regrouped at the well, the men looked shaken. Sweat dripped down faces that had faced firefights without flinching. "This place isn't on the map because it isn't supposed to be here," Morales said. "It's wrong." Harris snapped at him more harshly than necessary. "Cut it. We're not here to speculate. We're here to follow orders." But even he didn't sound convinced. As they prepared to move out, Turner pointed at the well. The rope dangling from the pulley was wet. Drops of water glistened fresh against the dust, dripping from the bucket's edge. Yet when they looked inside, the well was bone dry. The whispers from the night before came back to Morales in a rush, curling around his ears like smoke. And for the first time, he let himself believe what none of them wanted to say. The valley wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting. Chapter 5. Midnight Watch. Shadows that moved on their own. The squad set up camp on the edge of the abandoned village, inside a half-ruined compound that gave them walls on 3 sides. They stacked sandbags, set claymore mines on the perimeter, and rotated guards in 2-man shifts. Every sound of stone shifting in the wind had them tightening their grips on their rifles. But as night fell, the strangest thing wasn't what they heard. It was what they saw. Walker and Morales took the first watch. They sat near the gate, NVGs sweeping the narrow alleys, listening to the occasional rattle of loose wood as the wind slipped through broken shutters. "Feels like this place is breathing," Morales muttered, tapping ash from his cigarette. Walker was about to snap at him for smoking on watch when he noticed something move in his peripheral vision, a shadow at the far end of the street. He swung his rifle up instantly. Morales froze, following his gaze. Through the green glow of their night vision goggles, they saw it clearly, a figure, tall and thin, standing at the end of the alley. "Contact!" Walker whispered into his radio, trying to stay calm. Harris's voice crackled back. "Hold fire. Identify before engaging." Walker blinked. The figure was gone. "Where?" Morales started, but then gasped. The shadow was closer now. Still no sound, no footsteps. Just closer. Both men gripped their rifles, scanning with NVGs. The alley was empty again. Empty, but wrong. The shadows weren't where they should be. The moonlight cast them at angles that didn't match the buildings. A wall's shadow stretched, sideways instead of down. A post threw no shadow at all, and then Morales swore under his breath. "They're moving!" Walker followed his gaze. Across the dirt, the shadows shifted, sliding along the ground like spilled oil, slow and deliberate. Not with the wind, not with the moon. On their own. The radio hissed again. "Report!" Harris demanded. Before Walker could answer, something darted across the alley. Not a man, not an animal. A darker shadow within the shadows, racing along the wall and disappearing behind a house. Morales lost it. He fired a burst into the darkness, the muzzle flash lighting up empty walls. The squad jolted awake, boots pounding as they scrambled. "To defensive positions." "What the hell are you shooting at?" Harris barked, storming to the gate. "I saw it! I swear to God I saw it!" Morales panted, pointing at the wall. "It moved, sir. It moved." The men swept the area, Rifles raised, flashlights cutting beams through the alleys. Nothing. No footprints. No enemy fighters. Just the empty village staring back at them, silent and unbothered. But Walker noticed something. He crouched near. The wall Morales had fired at. The bullet holes were there, clean through mud brick. But the angle was wrong. The rounds had hit lower than Morales had aimed, almost as if gravity had dragged the bullets downward mid-flight. Back inside the compound, Harris tried to restore order. "We stick to protocol. Rotate watch. No more jumpy trigger pulls. Whatever you thought you saw." The words died in his throat, because as he turned, Harris saw it himself. In the corner of the compound, where the moonlight barely reached, a long shadow was cast against the wall, a soldier's silhouette. Helmet, rifle, the outline unmistakable. But no one stood there. The squad froze, every man staring at the phantom shape stretched across the wall. Then slowly, the shadows. Head turned toward them, Morales dropped his rifle. Walker's voice cracked, raw with fear. "Sir, that's not ours." And just like that, the shadow slid across the wall, dissolving into the darkness beyond the compound, leaving nothing behind but the memory of movement where there should have been none. No one slept the rest of the night. Chapter 6. The Hidden Cave. Discovery of something not human. By the third day, nerves were stretched thin. Sleep was fractured into minutes at a time. The whispers in the wind hadn't stopped, the shadows hadn't behaved like shadows should, and Morales was on the edge of collapse. Even Captain Harris, who'd kept his iron composure, now looked like a man carrying a secret heavier than his weapon. Then Turner found the cave. They had been sweeping the eastern ridge of the valley, checking for signs of enemy movement. Turner called out over the radio, his voice trembling with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement. "Sir, you're gonna want to see this." The squad gathered at the base of a sheer rock face. There, half hidden, behind a curtain of hanging brush, was an opening. Not a natural crack in the stone, but a deliberate cut. An arched entrance, smoothed by tools, leading straight into blackness. Walker cursed under his breath. Caves. He told us not to touch the damn caves. Harris stood silent, jaw tight. His orders had been clear, under no circumstances enter the caves. But the tracks, the fresh barefoot prints, led directly into the mouth of this one. "It's too coincidental," Morales said, voice hoarse. "Everything's pulling us here." Against his better judgment, Harris made the call. 2-man scout team, in and out, document, no deeper than 50 meters. Walker and Morales volunteered, though Morales looked like he already regretted it. NVGs down, flashlights mounted. They stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Cold, still. Heavy with a smell like wet stone and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, etched with shallow grooves. That looked less like erosion and more like writing. Not Arabic, not Pashto, not anything human eyes had been meant to read. They moved deeper, boots crunching over dust and small bones littering the floor. Animal bones, at first glance. But some were too long. Too thin. Not right. Jesus. Walker muttered, shining his light on a pile. "Tell me that's a goat." Morales didn't answer. He was staring at the wall. His hand hovered an inch from the stone, where dozens of overlapping handprints were pressed into the surface. Not painted, not carved. Pressed, as though the rock had been soft once, yielding to touch, and the hands were wrong. Too many fingers. Too long. Morales stepped back, shaking his head. This isn't right, man." Then they heard it, a sound deeper in the cave, a shuffle, a breath. Both men froze, weapons raised. The sound came again, unmistakable, Movement, but slow, dragging, deliberate. Walker keyed his mic. "We've got contact. Something's in here." Static. No. Response. "Repeat. We've got—" Before he could finish, the NVGs flickered, then died. Both their flashlights cut out simultaneously, plunging the cave into total black. In that suffocating dark, the sound came closer. A scrape of something against stone, a whisper that wasn't carried on the wind but breathed directly into their ears. Morales broke. He fired blind, muzzle flash lighting the cave for split seconds. What he saw made his stomach twist. A figure crouched against the wall, pale and too long-limbed, its face turned away, yet its shadow stretched in the wrong direction. Then the light was gone again. They stumbled backward, firing, screaming for Harris, for anyone. Walker grabbed Morales by the vest, dragging him toward the entrance. The whispers swelled into a chorus, dozens of voices speaking in unison, in English, in languages they didn't know, in tones too close to their own. By the time they burst into daylight, both men were pale and shaking, lungs burning. The others rushed to meet them, weapons ready. "What the hell did you see?" Harris demanded. Walker didn't answer. He just ripped off his helmet, bent over, and vomited into the dirt. Morales finally spoke, voice hollow, eyes unfocused. "Not human! It's not human in there!" The squad went silent, staring into the black mouth of the cave. For the first time since the mission began, Harris didn't bark orders. He didn't tell them to hold the line or follow protocol. He just stared at the cave like a man who had always known this moment was coming and dreaded it. Chapter 7. Radio silence. When communication fails completely, the squad regrouped on the ridgeline above the cave, a thin line of soldiers silhouetted against the jagged horizon. No one spoke. The silence pressed heavier than the heat, heavier than the weight of their gear. Finally, Captain Harris broke it. "We move back to higher ground, re-establish comms, get word to Bagram." It was the only sensible order. Whatever was in that cave, whatever wasn't supposed to exist here, they needed backup. Turner unpacked the long-range set, extending the collapsible antenna. Static hissed as he cycled through frequencies, his gloved hands moving with muscle memory. Thunder. "1, this is Falcon Squad. Radio check over. Nothing but white noise. Thunder 1. This is Falcon Squad. Copy? Over." Static, then a faint click, like someone had keyed up their mic, but no words followed. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Turner frowned, adjusted the dials, switched channels. "All right. Trying secondary frequency. Thunder 1, Falcon Squad. Do you copy?" More static. Then faintly, so faintly they almost missed it, came a voice. "Falcon Squad." Turner's eyes lit up. "We've got them. Say again." "Thunder 1, say again," the voice repeated, exactly the same, word for word. "Falcon Squad." A chill ran down Walker's spine. He grabbed the handset from Turner. "Thunder 1, this is Sergeant Walker. Authenticate. Give me day code." Silence. Then the voice again, identical, like a recording on loop. "Falcon Squad." Morales swore under his breath. "That's not them. That's not them." The radio suddenly erupted in overlapping voices, a chorus of static-laced whispers. The men recoiled as their own names bled through the noise. Morales, Walker, Turner, spoken in perfect clarity, in voices that weren't theirs. Turner yanked the battery pack free, killing the set. The silence that followed felt even worse. Harris clenched his jaw. "Pack it up. Short range only from now on." But the handhelds weren't any better. Each one clicked, popped, or spat static. Occasionally, a fragment of English bled through, phrases like "behind you" or "don't." "Look." But when they spun around, rifles raised, nothing was there. It wasn't just the radios. The GPS units flickered and died. Digital watches froze at random times. Even the squad's NVGs stuttered, their green glow fading in and out like a dying pulse. By nightfall, Harris made the call to hole up inside the abandoned village again. They set perimeter mines, doubled the watch, and tried unsuccessfully to eat cold rations without staring at the shadows. Walker sat on the rooftop, headset useless around his neck, watching the horizon. The mountains loomed like walls, cutting them off from the world beyond. He felt it in his gut. They weren't just out of range. Something was blocking them, holding their signals down, caging them inside this valley. Around midnight, Morales crept up beside him, eyes wild. "Sarge, I heard my mom's voice on the radio. Swear to God it was her. She's been dead 5 years. Walker didn't know what to say. He just stared at the black mouth of the cave in the distance, a wound in the mountain that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Down below, Turner kept fiddling with the long range, desperate. He swore he almost caught a carrier wave, almost got a clean signal, but every time he thought he had it, the voices came back, this time laughing, distorted, like children playing in the static, when he finally snapped and hurled the radio against the wall. No one stopped him. By dawn, the squad accepted the truth. They weren't cut off because of terrain. They weren't cut off because of enemy jamming. They were cut off because something wanted them that way. And in the silence where command should have been, the valley itself was beginning to speak. Chapter 8. The Vanishing Squad. Brothers in. Arms gone without a trace by the fourth night, exhaustion had become a weapon. The men were jumpy, snapping at each other, jerking awake at phantom noises. Even Harris looked frayed, his calm exterior slipping every time the radio spat whispers instead of orders. That was the night Corporal Jensen vanished. He had been posted on the southern perimeter, a spot overlooking the dry well in the center of the village. Walker had checked on him at Oro 200. Jensen was fine, smoking quietly, NVG lenses reflecting the faint moonlight. At Oro 230, Turner came to relieve him. The position was empty, no footprints leaving the post, no sign of a struggle. His rifle leaned neatly against the wall, magazine still loaded. His helmet lay in the dust beside it as though he'd simply taken it off and walked into the night. "Check every house," Harris barked. The squad spread through the alleys, boots pounding, flashlights cutting through shadows. They searched. Rooftops, basements, even the goat pen full of old bones. Nothing. It was as if Jensen had been erased. When they regrouped, Walker counted the men. "That's impossible. Nobody gets snatched without noise, without something." "Maybe he broke," Morales said, voice shaking. "Maybe he just walked off." "No," Walker snapped. "Jensen doesn't break. Not like this." But deep down, even he wasn't sure anymore. By dawn, Jensen was still gone. The squad huddled together, silent, each man avoiding the other's eyes. Then, the next night, Private Ellis disappeared. He had been asleep. Morales swore Ellis had been in his sleeping bag when he took over watch. An hour later, Morales glanced back, and the bag was flat, empty, zipped up neatly. Ellis's gear was untouched. They tore through the compound, shouting his name, shining lights into every corner. But like Jensen, Ellis had simply ceased to exist. That broke something in the squad. Turner cursed and smashed his rifle stock against the wall until the butt cracked. Morales muttered prayers in Spanish, rocking back and forth. Walker accused him of falling asleep, of letting Ellis vanish. Harris had to physically separate them before fists flew. When morning came, 2 men were gone. No blood, no signs of resistance. Just absence. The squad's bond, the thing that made them more than just soldiers, that made them brothers, was fracturing with every hour. They had always sworn never to leave a man behind, but now men were leaving them. disappearing into thin air without a chance to fight back. On the fifth night, Harris gave an order none of them wanted to hear. "We move. We don't stop until we're out of this valley." They packed fast, adrenaline driving them harder than rations ever could. But as they filed out of the village, Morales froze at the gate. "Sir," he whispered. The others turned. There, in the dust outside the compound, were fresh boot prints. Jensen's size, Ellis's size. The tread pattern matched standard-issue U.S. boots. The tracks led away from the village, straight, toward the mountains. They weren't wandering. They weren't dragged. They had walked. "Follow them," Harris said. The squad hesitated. The tracks stretched into the gorge ahead, disappearing into a corridor of rock that looked more like a throat than a passage. Morales whispered, "They didn't leave, sir. They were led." No one wanted to argue because, in their hearts, they already knew it was true. And as the squad followed the prints into the narrowing gorge, each man felt it, the crushing certainty that before long, more of them would vanish. Chapter 9. The Encounter, Face to Face with the Impossible. The gorge funneled the squad into a stone corridor so narrow they had to move single file. The boot prints of Jensen and Ellis marched ahead of them, crisp, in the dust, as if made only hours before. The cliffs rose so high they blocked out the sun, plunging the path into cold shadow even though it was midday. No one spoke. The only sounds were the scrape of boots on rock and the occasional rattle of gear. Each man's eyes darted between the narrowing walls, rifles at the ready. Then the prints stopped. Walker crouched, running his gloved fingers over the final impression. "Last steps here, then nothing. Just gone. Maybe the wind covered." "Them," Turner muttered, though there was no wind in the gorge. Harris scanned the walls. "Stay sharp. We're not alone here." That was when Morales froze, staring ahead. "Sir," his voice cracked, "do you see that?" At first it looked like another cave mouth in the cliffside, dark, gaping, hungry. But as their eyes adjusted, they realized something stood in front of it. Tall, thin, too long in the limbs, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, as if curious. The figure didn't step forward, didn't move at all. It just watched. The men raised their rifles. "In unison, identify yourself," Harris shouted, his voice echoing harshly off the stone. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly tilted its head back, like a puppet on strings. The shadows around it stretched unnaturally, writhing across the ground as though alive. "Jesus Christ," Turner whispered. Then in the silence of the gorge came a voice. Not from the creature. From behind the squad. "Walker. Morales." They spun, rifles sweeping. The voice was Ellis's. Perfectly clear. Perfectly human. But no one was there. "Jensen!" Walker shouted, hope and fear colliding in his chest. "Help me!" the voice cried. Closer now, echoing through the stone. The squad hesitated, half of them turning toward the voices of their missing brothers, the other half unable to take their eyes off the figure by the cave. That was when it moved, not with steps, but with a glide, its limbs bending too far, too fluid. In the blink of an eye, it was closer, 20 meters, then 10. The NVGs flickered, static dancing across the lenses. "Fire!" Harris ordered. The gorge erupted with gunfire, muzzle flashes strobing against the rock. Bullets struck the figure, stone shattering behind it. But it didn't fall, didn't flinch. The rounds seemed to bend around it like the air itself was warped. Then, impossibly, it was among them. Walker felt a chill slam into him, knocking the breath from his lungs. The figure wasn't touching him, but its shadow was, wrapping around. His boots, stretching up his legs like black water climbing uphill. Morales screamed and opened fire, point blank. The muzzle flash lit its face for a heartbeat, pale, hollow-eyed, a mouth too wide, filled with teeth too small, too many. And worse, it wasn't unfamiliar. Morales swore he recognized it. It looked like Ellis. For a split second, the features were his. Then Jensen's, then a dozen others, flickering like a broken film reel, as if the thing was wearing stolen faces. Turner broke ranks, sprinting down the gorge in panic. His screams echoed off the walls. The figure's head snapped toward him. And in an instant, Turner was gone. Not grabbed, not dragged, just gone. The squad fell back, firing until magazines clicked empty. Harris bellowed for order, for regroup, but his voice was drowned by the chorus of whispers rising all around them. Not just one voice, dozens, hundreds, everyone familiar, family members, fallen comrades, their own. The figure paused, its head tilting once more, as if savoring the fear. Then it melted backward into the cave's darkness, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The gorge was silent again, except for the ragged breathing of the survivors. They were down another man. The boot prints of the vanished still fresh at their feet, and for the first time, Harris admitted what none of them wanted to say out loud. This isn't a mission anymore, it's a trap. Chapter 10. The Cover-Up. Why this mission was erased. From history only, 3 men made it back from the mountains: Harris, Walker, and Morales. They were gaunt, hollow-eyed, more like ghosts than soldiers. They told their story, every detail of what they had seen and heard, but command didn't blink. The colonel's words were final. This mission never happened. Do you understand? Me? The reports were rewritten. Jensen, Ellis, Turner, and the others were listed as KIA in an ambush. Folded flags were sent to grieving families with carefully crafted letters about bravery and sacrifice. No mention of caves or shadows, or things wearing human faces. Just another loss in a long war that swallowed men whole. The survivors learned quickly that the truth had no place in their world. Morales tried to speak up, but he was shut down, dismissed as unstable. Walker drowned his nightmares in alcohol, haunted by whispers that followed him across oceans. Harris buried himself in his uniform, wearing medals on the outside while carrying silence on the inside. Officially, the squad's story ended there. Unofficially, it never did. In quiet corners of military archives, the file exists. Redacted, locked, marked, classified. Do not release. It will never see daylight. It was erased not because it wasn't real, but because it was. The mountains of Afghanistan still hold their secrets. Villages vanish, patrols never return, and sometimes soldiers whisper of voices in the wind that call them by name. But you won't read about it in any history book. You won't find it on any map, because the truth was buried with those men, sealed in silence. And some missions stay that way, not forgotten, but erased. Forever. The end.